Every day when you wake up and you choose to get out of bed, you are engaging in a battle you must fight. That battle may be with yourself, your peers, or even the world, but it is a battle we must all act in. Some days you'll lose, some days you'll win, but each day you get up and do it. And it's not easy. Eventually you'll want to stop. Haven't you done enough already? But you can't give up, even if you're tired, even if you're betrayed, even if everything you know and love and hate falls apart. You have to get up the next day and do it again. That's what you have to do to be able to revolutionize the world. And maybe someday you won't have to fight anyone anymore. Trigger warning. Mentions and discussions of the emotional, physical, and sexual abuse of minors. It's not graphic, and I certainly won't be showing it, but I am going to talk about it at length, and I don't want to ruin anyone's day over my dumb anime video. Okay? Okay. This is my complicated relationship with revolutionary girl Utena. But first, some context. Until 1962 in the United States, certain sodomy laws classified homosexuality as a felony in every state, which was punishable by imprisonment or hard labor. The sexual revolution in the United States was a period of time from the 1960s to 80s where people fought for the concept of free love, sparked by the invention of the pill that let women finally have some control over their reproduction. Women could engage in casual sexual relations. The free love label applied loosely to any sort of relationship that didn't fit into the standard heteronormative lens, such as multiple lovers or homosexuality. In the 60s, police raids of queer establishments, such as gay bars, were fairly common, until one such raid on the Stonewall Inn on June 28, 1969, sparked a 6-day violent protest between civilians and law enforcement. The Stonewall riots served as a catalyst for a nationwide gay rights movement, and the first Pride marches took place in 1970 on the anniversary of the riots. In 1973, homosexuality would be removed from the American Psychological Association's list of mental illnesses. Later, at the start of the 80s, was the AIDS epidemic, coined the homosexual plague, that killed thousands of United States citizens. It would be mostly and intentionally ignored by the government due to the disproportionate number of gay men contracting it. In 1989, Denmark was the first country to have a legal recognition of same-sex partnerships, but not marriage. True same-sex marriage would replace the registered partnership law in 2012. The Netherlands became the first country in the world to legalize same-sex marriage in 2001. 1996, September 21st, President Bill Clinton of the United States signs the Defense of Marriage Act into law, which bans the federal government from recognizing same-sex unions. And that's not including places outside of America where homosexuality is still criminalized to this day. Gay marriage would slowly be introduced into America on a state-by-state basis until 2015, where the Supreme Court struck down all state bans on same-sex marriage, legalizing it in all 50 states. That was 4 years ago. The present, or close to it. Revolutionary Girl Utena is a 39-episode anime that ran from April to December of 1997, 22 years ago, and is directed by Kunihiko Ikuhara. That is the landscape in which the manga by Chiho Saito was adapted into an anime on the island of Japan, where gay marriage is still not legalized to this day. A world wherein by 1997 only 6 countries in the world had any form of legalized same-sex partnerships, and people everywhere were fighting for LGBT rights. That is the landscape in which Utena was created, and if we're going to talk about Utena as a series at length, I think it's important to know. If you're not familiar already with Utena, you might recognize Kunihiko Ikuhara's other directorial works on the Sailor Moon S anime and the Sailor Moon R movie, which are the gayest ones in the series. Or maybe you're more familiar with his contemporary work, Sarazanmai, Yuri Kuma Arashi, and Penguin Drum. Those who are familiar will recognize some of the eccentricities that are embedded in his work, such as rose petals, symbolism, surreal imagery, and queer theory. Like most of Ikuhara's works, people say that Utena as a series is hard to understand, and I get that. Most likely, it'll take a second watch of the series before the pieces start to line up in any meaningful way. Combined with its obtuse storytelling and surreal, reality bending imagery, it's hard for any audience to pick out what is truth, what is metaphor, and what is mere artistic flair for the dramatic. Even so, Revolutionary Girl Utena is one of my favorite anime of all time, which is a little baffling because the first time I watched it, I didn't like it. It has some of my favorite things in it: fairy tale subversions and aesthetics used to convey a cutting critique, magical girls, lady swordswomen, queer representation, so you would think I would have loved it. But it also had some of my least favorite things in it. The show was pitched to me by a friend after I was gushing about Madoka, and she recommended it as Madoka Magica but with actual lesbians. But it was made in the 90s. Like Sailor Moon, the queer representation isn't exactly explicit. And if you're like me and were 19 when you finished watching it, you might be upset and think that you just got queer baited. And by the way, present me is just gonna pop in and clarify that Utena is not queer baiting, just so we're all clear. For one thing, it has a tournament arc, which I'm not usually a fan of, but my biggest problem was the multiple incestuous relationships. I cannot stand anime's fetishization of incest. It makes my skin crawl. But the real problem was I was only half watching it. I was skipping around, possibly animating at the time while watching it, so I only saw the surface stuff and kind of missed what it actually had to say. Basically, Utena is driven by its visual storytelling, and if you're only reading the text, you're not reading between the lines at all. My memories are kind of fuzzy, but I think I had a guide that had me skipping whole episodes and entire fights, and possibly even an entire season that were classified as filler. Like, I get why I did it. It's almost 40 episodes. That's a big investment. And normally skipping around wouldn't hurt my viewing experience, but normal shows don't put major plot information that is essential to understanding the series in its recap episodes. I mean, who even does that? So why, after all that, is Utena my favorite? I came back to the friend who had recommended the show to me, feeling disappointed and somewhat betrayed. Not at my friend, at the show. I told her how I watched it, and she sat me down and literally told me that the filler is some of the best parts. And I was like, really? But I did go back to it a few years later, and really properly watching it, not skipping around, made me realize how special Revolutionary Girl Utena really is. Utena is one of those series that's better the second time around, especially now that I'm older, I see things in a different light. Every problem I had with the series upon first viewing was a necessary component for understanding Utena's plot and themes. I struggled in writing this script because, unlike the relatively short run of Hoseki no Kuni, which is still a work in progress, Utena is as complete as it's ever going to be. And with a manga 39 episode adaptation and movie, there is just so much to talk about, from an episode to episode basis, to characters, to its themes, to symbolism, to stuff that literally no one has been able to come up with an adequate explanation for ever, that the script has kind of gotten away from me. So, to stop myself from writing a book-length analysis, I'm only going to focus on the relationships between Utena, Anthy, and Akio. But to do that, I'm also going to have to talk a bit about the movie and how the world functions. So please bear with me if it seems like I wander in my musings. It's very hard to talk about Utena linearly. So what is Revolutionary Girl Utena even about? On the surface, Otori Academy is a normal school with normal students living out their everyday high school lives, and Utena Tenjo happens to be one of those normal students, except that she dresses like a boy because she wants to become a prince. Out of the whole cast, Utena is the easiest character to talk about and to understand her motivations because, for the most part, she's very honest. It's not that Utena is trans, she doesn't have any dysphoria and is perfectly comfortable to sport long hair and identify as a girl, while still insisting on wearing a boy's uniform and referring to herself as a prince. She defies gender norms without really identifying or conforming to any gendered labels like non-binary or gender fluid. Utena is just Utena, and she's also kinda an idiot. There's this really cute detail where if Utena is waiting for someone, she'll be doing stretches or something in the background. It's just little touches like that that really sell her restless, childish attitude and makes her so endearing. She's young, impulsive, doesn't think things through. She acts on emotion in a way that will help her live up to her ideals. This is partially because Utena was orphaned as a young child and couldn't find the will to live until a prince came and saved her. Wanting to emulate him became her reason for living. She doesn't have any sort of support system or reference for familial love or being a family unit apart from vague childhood memories, and an aunt that is mentioned briefly in the manga and is cut from the anime completely. Without any proper adult role model, coupled with her strong beliefs in chivalry, means that she's very passionate and determined, but this also means that she's naive and very easy to manipulate. Becoming a prince. The first thing to understand about Utena as a series is that the concept of princehood is divorced from its literal meaning. A prince is not the literal definition of a male born into a monarchy or married to a princess. Rather, a prince is a role that can be obtained by acting and behaving in a certain way. The prince encompasses the chivalrous ideals of helping the weak and going on quests to save people. A storybook prince right out of a fairy tale, if you will. I think this is more jarring to Western viewers as a concept, as we've actually had monarchies, as opposed to Japanese audiences. Think about how many anime throw around the prince of the high school or whatever, and we don't bat an eye. It's sort of like that. Just as one can work to become a knight or a witch if they play the part correctly, one too can become a prince. Now, when I say play the part, I mean it literally. Utena's attempts to be a prince are completely performatory. It is a role she is acting in to fulfill a narrative about her life. She wants to be brave, selfless, chivalrous, and to save people, because to her, that's what a prince is. But deep down, buried beneath all that, the reason she behaves in that way is because she wants to be praised and admired for those actions. With the loss of her parents, she is seeking validation and approval to the closest thing that she has to it, the only other adult in her life, the prince who she admires and emulates, and that's why she's so desperate to meet him again. This idea of playing or defying the role one is given applies to basically all of Utena's cast. In a world that is built on rigid heteronormative ideals where all girls are princesses, all boys are princes, if you defy that role, there are going to be consequences. If you are the best friend character and you try to change your role and become the protagonist, there are going to be consequences. But what is a prince without a princess? So imagine Utena's reaction when she encounters soft-spoken Anthy Himemiya being victimized by the student council member Saionji. Utena naturally rushes into her defense, outraged. Saionji, seeing Utena's ring, challenges her to battle in the duelist arena held deep in the forest and explains that whoever wins the dueling game becomes engaged to and claims ownership over Anthy, the Rose Bride. After meeting some unknown criteria, only by possessing her they will be able to attain the even less clear power to revolutionize the world, whatever that means. Now, Utena is somewhat upset by this because for some reason she finds it distasteful for one person to own another person. She finds it upsetting that people are fighting for ownership and engagement of a human being, a brown, coded Indian 14-year-old girl. Look, I'm not going to talk about the very real problem of child brides, human sex trafficking, or slavery in my dumb video about anime, but it's there, guys. Utena wins the duel, but is stuck being engaged to Anthy because if she doesn't participate in the duels, one of these other unsavory individuals, who again think of Anthy literally as a prize to be won, will own her and they will absolutely mistreat her in some way. Add to that the knowledge from the scene where it is implied that Anthy had to sleep with Saionji under the contract of the Rose Bride, only for it to be immediately reneged as Saionji admits several episodes later that what he was talking about was not sex, but merely an exchange diary, meaning that Anthy hadn't been assaulted in that particular instance, but very well could have been under different circumstances. Therefore, Utena can't back out in clear conscience, even if she's not pleased about it. Bizarrely, Anthy seems completely unbothered by her role as the Rose Bride. It's unclear what her role exactly is and why she can pull a sword from her chest and why possessing her grants the engaged some power, but it seems clear that she has chosen this role for herself, despite Utena's repeated attempts to convince her to quit being the Rose Bride. But in episode 11, Utena loses, and the friendship she's forged with Anthy thus far is revealed to have all been an act. Anthy, as she had been with all other duelists, was performing up to Utena's expectations of her. Utena wanted to play prince, so Anthy performed her role of helpless princess perfectly. We'll dive into depth about Anthy's character later, but this is a blow not only for Utena, but for the audience as well. We both have to come to terms with the fact that we don't really know anything about Anthy at all. Utena was just projecting her own desires onto her, just like everyone else was. We, the audience, know that in spite of this act, Anthy does still miss Utena. We see it in the quiet moments when Anthy is by herself, when there's no one else to reflect, when she has no part to perform. We get a brief glimpse into her true feelings. But Utena has no such viewpoint. Utena has to come to terms with this on her own, and then decides to fight in the duels once more, this time for herself. She fights in the duels to save Anthy, even if there is no reward, because that's what a prince would do. And no matter what, Utena is a prince, not for anyone, but for herself. She knows that Anthy shouldn't be with someone who thinks of her as an object, and the only way to prevent that is to win her hand so that no one else can. Performance is a large theme in Utena's story, perhaps even one of its main themes. As a fairy tale subversion, everyone has a role they think they need to fit into, be that prince or princess, villain or witch. The Shadow Girls play and the exposition they provide near the end of the series, which is shown literally as a play, really hammers in the theme of spectator and actor. The first 12 episodes play out in a cookie-cutter standard layout with Utena fighting the 4 members of the student council, and this is intentional. The audience is primed and brimming with their expectations set. Utena is going to win the tournament, become a prince, and free Anthy from the bondage she is chained to, and they'll ride off into the sunset on a white horse. After 12 or 24 or more episodes of rehashed tournament battles. A simple girl power anime with a message that, hey, girls can be princes too. That's what I was expecting, and in truth, there's nothing wrong with that. Actually, that's sort of how the source material ends. The much less often talked about manga sees Utena achieving her goal, inheriting the power of Dios and becoming a true prince. But that's why it's much less talked about. The manga plays its themes straight without expecting anything more from its audience, and it doesn't have a hit to it the way the anime does. Because of that, it's one of the reasons it's not as memorable as there's less mystery. Actually, that's part of why I was so upset at the anime. I wanted for Utena to be able to become a prince. Why shouldn't she if she wants to? I was really rooting for her. But it's not as nuanced as the anime's deconstruction of the patriarchy that asks, what is a prince? Why do we value it? Why is it more valuable than being a princess? Why is the system built like this to take advantage of some and grant entitlements to others? And much like Princess Tutu, if Utena had stopped at its first season, I wouldn't be talking about it right now. We'll get to Princess Tutu eventually. But after the first season is the Black Rose arc, and yikes! The tone shift from season 1 to season 2 takes a hard turn. Suddenly, Utena has to fend off a whole slew of different people fighting with the rings from the corpses from the last duelist game that claimed the lives of 100-something boys in a fire. Ghosts are walking around thinking that they're alive. The student council have their souls forcibly ripped out from their body by their loved ones. Nanami becomes a cow. Don't skip this episode. I know it's filler, but you gotta. This season introduces Akio, the headmaster of Otori Academy and Anthy's older brother. Now, you might find it strange we haven't talked about him, and Anthy hasn't mentioned him at all in these 12 episodes we spent with her, but we'll get to him. This sudden tone shift marks the turning point for the series, as up until now we've been watching something with Sailor Moon levels of nuance. But it's only going to get darker and explore more adult themes from here on out. I mean, as dark as a series that can't have blood on screen can get, which, spoilers, is incredibly dark. Okay, so I've talked in sort of vague terms up until this point, because if you hadn't seen Utena but you want to, and again, I don't know how you haven't but are watching this video, please stop and go watch it and come back, because I'm about to get into some heavy spoilers. Okay? Okay. To actually talk about the series, there are some obtuse things about the world that we just have to accept. Anthy and Dios's ambiguous magical power, combined with his namesake, meaning God, leaves us with the implication that they are both probably some form of immortal deities. This is never stated directly in the anime, but is actually confirmed in the manga, so take that for what you will. That's what the whole obtaining the power of revolution thing is about. It's why the final duel is at Dios's grave, and why that grave shatters spontaneously when Utena declares that she's going to save Anthy and become a prince. Because the power of revolution is the inheritance of godhood. If her resolution is strong enough, she'll win, obtain godhood, and change the world. She'll revolutionize it. Regardless, the two of them being deities makes sense when you realize that the world of Otori Academy is stuck in a time loop. Without this information, I understand why people interpret the film as separate canon, but for now, please try to consider this viewpoint. When defining the word revolution, most people first think of the French Revolution, or maybe the sexual revolution, a revolutionary war in which there is some sort of upheaval that polarizes the world, changing one thing into a new, different thing. That is the meaning most often referenced in the show. But revolution has a secondary meaning, to revolve. The Earth completes a revolution around the sun once a year. It rotates, it's a loop. We see the second meaning visually represented by the roses that turn endlessly in the opening and key scenes, the rotation of walking up the staircase, or the seemingly rotating pattern of the elevator shaft that Utena ascends to fight each duel, in the tournament's layout that is repeated in the formulaic ritual of each episode. Yes, the filler reused animation is thematically important to understanding Utena's themes. I know, just listen. While in most cases filler or reused animation is a way to save money, and don't get me wrong, that is why it's used in Utena, but Utena is the only anime I have seen where it's directly tied into the show's thematic identity. Like, How often can I say that I'm 40 episodes into an anime and no, I didn't skip the opening song or intro to the fight scene because it's important for the storytelling? Never. That has never happened. But why am I so certain that the dueling game is a time loop? Well, it's confirmed by the Black Rose arc that there have been previous tournaments with 100 deceased duelists. After one of these cycles is completed, it is erased from everyone's memory. We see this when, in episode 14, Utena and Miki encounter Nemuro Memorial Hall, only for, in episode 23, the end of the arc, to show the same shot of them at the now burnt out husk that is all that remains, and Miki struggling to remember what the name of the building was. As long as one remains in the academy, unchanging, unaging, ghosts can wander Otori's halls as living people. Time doesn't pass for any of the students that live there. Until they graduate and can escape the garden called school, they won't actually be able to grow up, literally in this case. But we know that time is passing outside of Otori Academy because we see several characters like Mamiya's sister Tokiko come back for a visit with Akio, and she is older. She even comments on it how Mikage and Akio look the same as they ever have. That's what the student council motto is referring to. Without breaking out of the world's shell, the time loop that everyone is stuck in, they'll remain in this permanent state of being dead before they can be born. That's also why Otori Academy is referred to sometimes as a coffin, because the people who inhabit it are unchanging, lifeless. Once all of the requirements have been met, the tournament concludes. We reach the end of the world and achieve a revolution or the start of a new loop. The paralleled imagery we see in the end of the Black Rose arc in episodes 14 and 23 is used in a similar way at the end of the series. The very end of the last episode shows Anthy walking past the garden to the right in a mirror image of the first episode where Utena sees Anthy for the first time, except she's not there anymore, trapped in the birdcage of a garden. She's walking to where Utena was, on her way to tell Akio that she's leaving. Akio remarks how Utena is beginning to fade from memory, and that she caused no revolution, and that he's in the process of rewriting the rules and sending out new rings to start all over again. But he's wrong, because Utena succeeded, and because of that, Anthy is able to leave, because even if she wasn't able to properly change the world, she was able to make an impact on Anthy, and only then could she break the loop. I'm not sure if it's Anthy's magic that is the only thing keeping everything together and keeping all of the students under some sort of illusory absolute acceptance of reality. Actually, no, it probably is her. That explains episode 4, where Anthy pulls out random animals from phantom space only for them to never be seen from again. The laying eggs thing, the shadow girls, the boxing kangaroo, Nanami turning into a cow. Stuff that would normally be comedic absurdism in any other anime only further the non-reality of the school. Like the staircase in the forest and the castle in the sky that no one can see. They're all unobserved by everyone until a prerequisite is met. And no one ever seems to notice the absurdity except maybe Nanami, which is interesting because she is nowhere to be found in the movie. I don't have a theory for that, I just think it's interesting, especially how she's the first to find out about what Anthy and Akio are doing. If you have any theories about Nanami, I'd love to hear them. But in truth, I'm stalling. Speaking of what Akio is doing means we need to talk about Akio. Season 3 is when Akio really starts to matter, as he's been operating behind the scenes until now. He's Anthy's older brother and is the chairman of the academy, or at least he will be after he completes his arranged marriage with Kanae Otori. She is an 18-year-old girl who has not yet graduated from high school. Akio gained this position by manipulating all of them. He is sleeping with Kanai's mother during their engagement and has convinced her to poison Kanai's father. It's implied that Akio eventually kills not only Kanai's father, but her mother as well as her by poisoning all of them. Akio is an adult man that invites Utena Tenjo, a 14-year-old orphan girl with no living relatives, to live in his home with him and his sister Anthy, under the pretext of it being for Anthy's sake, and starts to groom Utena into being his child bride. All while under the same roof assaulting his also 14-year-old underaged, legally unable to give consent sister. Now, listen, I know Japan has some concerning laws about consent, and even in America, it's different from state to state. But where I live, there's a 4-year law. So if you were 18, you could legally have sex with a 14-year-old, but at 19, you couldn't. But hey, just because you can, maybe you shouldn't anyway. Akio's exact age is never explicitly revealed, but he is referred to as an adult, so over 18 at least. So imagine my experience watching Utena for the first time as a fresh 19-something-year-old, and nearing the end when I was pitched the series as Madoka Magica but with actual lesbians, only to watch Utena have sex with a man and Anthy to repeatedly have sex with that same man who is her brother, let alone what happens in the last few episodes. I was confused and betrayed. I was young. I wanted to see Utena become a prince and saved Anthy. I believed in her, and I couldn't understand why the two of them were sleeping with this guy. Why are Utena's last words apologizing for pretending to be a prince while everything crumbles around her? But now I get it. I'm not mad at my younger self. It makes sense why I thought that way, just like why Utena and Anthy were mad at each other instead of at Akio. It is the most upsetting thing going back and being older, watching these two girls talk about how they betrayed each other because they knew the other was interested in Akio and sleeping with him anyway. The scene where Utena loses her virginity and we see the road sign spell "stop" repeatedly in all caps as the camera blazes past them is so upsetting. When now, as an adult, I can so clearly see that no, you two are being abused. This guy is a monster. You didn't do anything wrong. You are literally unable to give consent. As an adult, Akio knows that and is manipulating you because you are both vulnerable and want to be loved. I hate this. With the context of the movie, it's implied that Akio was probably molesting Toga as well. And yeah, Toga perpetuates the cycle of abuse, but that doesn't mean he deserves to be abused. Akio is so terrifying as a villain because he's real. He's charming, polite, and handsome. He knows how to enchant women and is admired by his male peers. He never laughs at his villainy or does something for the sake of being evil. He's just a powerful person who thinks he deserves to be given even more power and won't hesitate to trample on everyone around him to get it. And behind closed doors, he is using his power to sexually abuse his underage sister. You could know someone like this man, and you could like him, and you would never know because people like him actually exist. Also, I'm going to pause here for a sec, just because I'm not sure what young person needs to hear this. But if you're a teenager or in high school and a 20 to 30 or something year old man tries to date you, or maybe even a friend, maybe stop and ask yourself, why first? I promise you it's not because you're not like other girls or whatever gross nonsense is used to rationalize it. Maybe talk to an adult you trust, or hell, Google some research laws about underage consent or accounts from women who had a similar experience. You have your whole life ahead of you, please be safe. As a character, Akio is written impeccably well, and I admire that. But I don't want to talk about him anymore. He's the worst. Get wrecked. Adolescence of Utena. The end. We've only been talking at this point about the original TV series, but really to understand Utena as a whole, we need to talk about the movie. Airing in 1999 in Japan 2 years after the finale of the anime, people tend to have very varied thoughts about how it fits into the continuity. Which some people say it can be a standalone film or a summary of the show, and while they are technically correct, they're wrong. Like, I'm kidding. Obviously, you can view it that way since there's a ton that's changed from the original show, but why would you? But actually, before that, speaking of the movie, I wanted to recommend Clear and Sweet, who made an 8-part analysis on the visual storytelling of the movie. And oh my gosh, while again, I disagree how the movie fits into the continuity, the meticulous analysis of each scene is incredibly impressive, and I recommend giving it a watch. Adolescence of Utena is a direct continuation of the anime series Revolutionary Girl Utena. It is, if you will, the end of Evangelion to the Neon Genesis Evangelion, the Madoka Rebellion to the regular Madoka. Yes, it is up for interpretation, but it makes much more sense as a conclusion to the series, and I would even argue it's more satisfying interpreted that way. First of all, as a standalone movie, it doesn't function properly. You can't go in blind and be satisfied or get the same experience knowing nothing about the anime. You might think it's good, but it won't hit you the same way. The same as a summary of the series. The main argument people make is that it can't be a continuation because many of the characters, plot beats, backstory, setting, and continuity are different. At the end of the series, Utena disappears. If it's a continuation, why is Anthe still the Rose Bride if she left at the end? Why is the prince dead? Why does everyone look different? The story is different. Some characters' backstories are completely rewritten. And I say, yes, all of those things happen and contradict some parts of the anime. But it's not that they contradict each other. It is new information that we didn't have before that reinforms the old series. After the tournament concludes and Akio inevitably fails, the revolution happens and the world goes through a soft reset. Akio starts each loop by sending out letters with rings for the new tournament, as shown in the last episode. People also forget any inconsistencies with the new world, like Utena being erased from reality. They will all forget her eventually. The logical conclusion then is that there have been many tournaments before this, and after each failure of Akio taking the sword and trying to force and steal a revolution and Anthe takes the hit, the world soft resets. It's why Anthe tries to kill herself before this arc can conclude, because she's trying to force a soft reset. If being stabbed by 1,000 swords won't permanently kill her, neither will jumping. They won't be able to achieve revolution properly without her to take the hit in the prince's place, and she'll try again the next loop, and maybe Utena will be safe. Moreover, the loops probably haven't happened once or twice, but probably hundreds of times, considering how run down Anthe is, and how resigned and nonchalant Akio is about failure. At first glance, it seems obvious that not everything is adding up. Oddities like Toga and the prince being dead, Nanami being a cow, people not remembering Utena and Anthe meeting for the first time should all point to this being a retelling. Except all of that is established in Utena's lore already from the Black Rose arc and how the world of Otori Academy operates. I have no explanation for why Nanami is a cow, perhaps permanently now. Maybe she was the whole time and she merely thought she was a human. I don't have an answer. But rather than this information contradicting the anime, it's more like we've just gained new information that we didn't have before that informs what is really happening in the anime in hindsight. In the last episode of the anime, Juri talks a little bit about a boy that tried to save her sister from drowning when they were children, but ended up drowning himself, and now she can't remember his name. But in the movie, it was Juri who was drowning, and Toga who saved her, and then he drowned. It seems contradictory, but it's not. It means that in the original anime, Toga has been dead this whole time. He just doesn't remember drowning and is walking around pretending to be alive. The same for Dios and Akio being a shell living in their coffins. I mean, heck, we see him walking around in the movie no problem, talking to people other than Utena. Akio does properly die in the last episode. It just doesn't stick because he's already dead. He's been dead for a long time, ever since Dios died. Even the movie acknowledges this with the prince being dead from the start and then appearing at the end anyway. Time has passed since the last episode. It's ambiguous, but maybe even 2 years have in real time. Everyone's hair is a little longer, and more importantly, without Akio, the school is falling apart. And I mean that literally. The walls moving around aren't flavor text. The school is literally falling apart. The garden that used to cage Anthe has been completely smashed. The framework that held her captive now pierce out of the ground like swords or crosses, symbolizing the grave it has become as it is dyed in red roses. The duelist arena, too, is no longer hidden deep in the forest, but in broad daylight at the highest point, where it has always been. Only this time, too, it has been slashed in half and is overgrown with blood red roses. Even the palace is no longer able to be held up in the sky, but has crashed down to earth after it fell apart. Utena's revolution wasn't a complete success. She wasn't able to change the world alone, but she laid the groundwork for Anthe to remove herself from her abusive relationship with Akio. However, Anthe is still going through the motions, waiting for Utena to be her prince, as a replacement for Dios. But Utena can't be her prince. They have to leave the coffin that confines them into their roles behind and enter the real world as two human beings, which is why Utena ends up becoming the vehicle for Anthe's escape, as she always has been. What happened in that year span that restarts them in Otorie Academy? I don't know, and I don't need to know. I don't need the movie to hold my hand on this. It never has, and it never will. But if Anthe is calling the shots now, then narratively it makes sense that at the end of the anime, Anthe took the first few steps to find Utena, and then the movie starts with Utena transferring back to be reunited with Anthe again. The movie is a new revolution. It's spring again. It's always been spring, and we've started the next time loop. No one recognizes Utena because she was erased from the world in the last episode. Wakaba, the student council, no one remembers her. Except Anthe. She's not affected by the revolution, and she absolutely remembers Utena. Anthe has so much more agency in this movie because she remembers. And we know that this is the same version of Anthe from the last episode because she doesn't have her glasses, which she abandoned on the table with Akio when leaving, and her hair is down. Visually, Utena and Anthe's designs now mirror each other's past selves, with Anthe's hair now being straight and down, and Utena's being wavy and pinned up. They've changed because of each other. Also, I just realized the short hair hat thing Utena has is like the reflection of Anthe's pin curls, giving the illusion of short hair, and why we get to see Utena confined by her short hair and then let loose when she lets it down. I'm so dumb. I know that point has always been like some contention about how it's short and then gets longer, but I think there's some concept art where it's like pinned up and inside itself. I don't know. It doesn't matter really. Actually, briefly speaking of concept art, Anthony's dress, how it's this red color? I always thought that was odd, especially how in the manga, a lot of the colors are different. Like, notably, Utena wears a pink boy's uniform, but Anthony's dress is white in the original. But I realized recently that it's probably changed to red because red symbolizes a lot of things: passion, blood, and roses, and it's very symbolic. But also, red is the traditional wedding color that like a bride would wear in Indian tradition. Like her sari would be red. Like white is not a universal bride color. I don't know, I thought that was interesting. I've watched this anime like 7 times, and another thing I didn't know about it came to light while writing this script. But it's not just Anthony's visual design that's changed, but her character as well. This is a much more open and honest Anthony. Instead of pretending to be an absurdly passive doormat, she is incredibly active now. The very first scene where Anthony and Utena meet, she sees Utena's ring. She sees that she's about to be caught up in the tournament again and immediately tries to snatch it away for her. Like, no, don't do that. You died last time. Mid-fight between Saionji and Utena, Anthony intervenes, tackling Utena and kissing her and letting her pull the Sword of Dios from her breast, even though by the rules of the Rose Bride, she should be unable to disobey Saionji, as he should have the right to it. She's incredibly biased, even more so than when she was rigging all of the duels to have Utena win for Akio's sake, to make Utena his child bride. Ugh. And yes, the duels are rigged. Anthe is a witch, and Utena has never held a sword before. She's only able to win the duels because she has the power of Dios, a power contained within Anthe. This is really apparent in the first season, where sometimes Anthe will seemingly behave completely out of character, like cheering Utena on in a fight with Miki that she has never done before and never will again, but does now only to make him lose. That's not to mention the casual, very friendly attitude she takes up after Utena wins her hand, immediately plopping herself on the bed, pleased as pie to be with Utena again, being able to lay next to her, talking late at night, this time facing each other without Akio in between. Like, get it, Anthe, yeah, woo! Because this is her world. And without Akio, Utena can win and be her true prince. Because Utena 1 obtained the power of Dios in the revolution, overcoming her gender, I guess? I don't know if that's actually in the rules of the duels. The previous Black Rose arcs contestants were all men, but perhaps the rules were changed after that? But Anthe does say Utena couldn't be her prince because she is a girl, and I know most of that is to twist the knife deeper into her as well as rationalize her own actions, but it could literally be the truth as far as Anthe perceives it. But while Anthe remembers everything, Utena doesn't. And while it can't be helped, some of it hurts, because Anthe loves Utena. She's in love with Utena, and she may not have known it when it started, but she knows it now. Anthe is purposefully hard to understand. She is a spectator in her own life. Most of her actions and words are a calculated facade, and the very rare moments where we see Anthe alone or being vulnerable and genuine are tellingly when she thinks no one is watching. I think that's why most people don't really like her, because she's hard to read and, stabs Utena in the back. So here's why I fucking love Anthe Himamiya. At the end of the first arc, Utena, and by proxy we, the audience, realize that though we've spent 12 episodes with Anthe and have been living with her, we don't know her at all. The reveal that all this time Anthe has just been playing the role of Utena's helpless friend as part of the script that is required for her being the Rose Bride. This is Anthe's internal logic. Utena was clearly able to see that she was only acting how Saionji wanted her to behave against her will, but wasn't able to see it when it applied to her. because we know this isn't entirely true, as even though Anthe is determined to act her part, Utena's smile still lingers in her mind, even though it shouldn't. Even though she doesn't deserve that smile, because she is deceiving Utena, deceiving everyone. And if Utena really knew what kind of person she was, she would hate Anthe. Because Anthe hates herself. But even so, Anthe can't prevent herself from missing that companionship from someone who doesn't hit her, who tries to care for her, even if she doesn't always succeed. Because Utena is Anthe's friend. Her only friend. Yeah, I know, but the only human person who has tried to treat Anthe like a normal girl, maybe ever, who doesn't see her as an object to be owned, and even if she did, at one point, she changed. But Utena won't succeed. She'll be swayed by Akio and used by him for his own means, and then they'll leave Anthe by the wayside to be discarded until Akio inevitably fails again and has to come crawling back to Anthe for her magic. And of course, she will help him, because she has no other choice. If she could have stopped before, she would have already. But she doesn't have anything, anyone in this world. Akio is the only thing left of Dios, her brother. He's all she has left, and she is not going to lose him. She will do what he says, even if it hurts them, even if it hurts both of them and all of humanity, and eventually ends the world. But she'll do it because she has to. Because she is the reason for Dios's death. She tried to save him, to keep her brother alive for herself, and she was brutally savaged for it. And even then, it didn't matter, because he died anyway. All that's left of him is a shell of his former self, and she's trapped now. 2 shells of people who died long ago pretending to be alive. Ghosts walking around pretending to be people. Why would she care? Why would she care about anything? There is only the revolution of the world repeating infinitely. And at the end of the world, the only thing waiting for Anthe is pain. An endless cycle of inescapable agony. Anthe is trapped like a chick in its eggshell, and there is nothing she can do about it. So, the only thing she can do about it is accept everything. Not involve herself and emotionally distance herself from everything happening around her. These people, these places, they don't matter. If they're not dead by the next cycle, they won't remember who she is anyway. They are all going to forget her, and she is going to have to live in this coffin forever. Anthe's characterization makes so much more sense upon a second viewing. All of her actions and motives are so purposefully unclear, it's only after the end of the series that some light is shed on her. Like why she doesn't bat an eye at being slapped around almost every episode, or the threat of sexual abuse. Why she sometimes seems to break out of that role and then slip back into submissiveness. Like, of course she doesn't. Why would being slapped hurt when she is annually stabbed with thousands of swords that are humanity's hate incarnate? But she doesn't try to resist because she thinks she deserves to be punished. Because she loves Dios. Because he's all she's ever had, and he's all she has left. Because she treats her body like a lifeless puppet that she is merely issuing commands to, since her real body and mind are locked away in a coffin. She watches the world pass by, people come in and out, but she is not present. She's an observer in her own life. She's watching a play, and sometimes she is an actor, and sometimes she's a prop. This internalized self-hatred is due partially to the scapegoating she's been subjected to. She didn't want her brother to die, so she gave up the ability, her birthright of being a princess, to become a witch so she could protect Dios. But it didn't work, and he died anyway. And as far as she is concerned, it is entirely her fault. which is why she accepts Akio's abuse, especially when she is literally scapegoated by taking the brunt of humanity's hatred repeatedly instead of the prince, the one who was meant to have to suffer and bear that burden to obtain godhood. Like Utena, she clings to the ghost of the prince, the shell that remains that is Akio, because, like Utena, her family is gone. And this shell is all she has left. Anthy's complete resignation and lack of faith that Utena could change anything, it makes sense after the realization that this cycle has not only been perpetuated multiple times, but as we see from the Black Rose arc and the flashbacks of Anthy being stabbed as a child. But if they are in fact deities outside of time, it could possibly have been going on for hundreds of years. And yet, after everything, Utena saves her. Battered and broken and betrayed again, Utena stands up and admits that the time she spent with Anthy was the happiest time of her life and begs to save her. And she's able to revolutionize the world. Utena is a revolutionary girl, not because of any power she has, but because she is able to break the cycle of abuse for herself, and because of that, Anthy chooses to follow her. I know I already gave the in-world reasons for why the movie is a continuation to the show, but most importantly, the movie is the true ending of the series because Utena is not a tragedy. I'm sure most of you watching are familiar with the term bury your gays, in which a long-running series will have queer representation, and then whether it's from studio executive pressure or just bad writing, queer characters are much more likely to have tragic endings or die than their straight counterparts. Queer characters are already incredibly underrepresented in media, so add on top of that the fact that when they are represented, they meet tragic endings, it's frustrating to see. And that's not actually accounting for whether the queer representation is positive in the first place, as villains are much more likely to be queer or queer-coded in some way. So as much as I love a bittersweet ending, I cannot choose to believe that Utena ends as such, because that's not what Utena's story is trying to tell, and I think Ikuhara knew that. Utena is not the story of the cycle of abuse and the literal incarnation of humanity's hatred spearing a young girl to death and her loved one being separated from her forever. Utena is the story of triumph, of two girls who were abused by the men who sit at the top of the system they've rigged, and despite that, despite everything, after all of that, they get out. Might not be on a white horse, there may not be any princes in the world. Hell, the real world might be a wasteland of destroyed machinery. But they got out, and they have each other. And that's why I love revolutionary girl Utena. I thought I knew what to expect. I thought I knew what was right. I thought I knew what I wanted and needed to hear. Ikuhara set me up and pulled the rug out from underneath me, and I fell hard. Utena is such a visually surreal series. Describing the plot doesn't really begin to tap into what's amazing about it, but maybe I'll be able to talk about that some other day. Obviously, I'm biased as a queer person and as an adult that finds it incredibly refreshing for an anime to say, hey, don't let adult teachers sleep with their underage students and or siblings, you degenerates. What's wrong with you? If your gaydar wasn't set off by my outfit or perhaps my mullet, maybe some of my two favorite anime being Queer Theory and Dismantling the Patriarchy with Revolutionary Girl Utena and entire non-binary cast Hoseki no Kuni, then maybe you should have it updated. The anime's message that you can't force someone in an abusive relationship to change. All you can do is be there for them and help them get out when they call on you is incredibly mature. I'm sorry this video got so dark in some places. I want my content to have a positive influence and don't want them all to be downers, but At the same time, I think it's important to talk about the real world problems Utena addresses, and I'd be doing the show a disservice if I ignored them. I just really appreciate the way the series handles some really sensitive content. I promise that whatever the next thing I talk about is, it won't be as heavy. But I hope you enjoyed this very long, rambly video. Thanks for sticking with me for almost or probably an hour. Huh? What do you think about Utena's world or characters? Should I do a video on Nanami? Is she best girl or worst girl? Is this what people do to generate conversation and content at the end of their videos? Ask who the best girl is. The new musical looks really cool. I don't know.